with another episode of Bridges, Courageous Conversations. I am your host, Ms. Kindness B. Ramirez.
And I'm your co-host, Tiffany Watkins.
And we are thrilled to be wrapping up this season with this particular episode. Today, for episode 8, we are having the courageous conversation around policy in the United States, particularly how it has impacted communities of color historically. This is the culmination of the season, right, Tiffany?
It really is. It really is tying it all together. All the things we've talked about this entire season, this is the reason.
This is the reason. And for me, I'm excited for the calls to action that will come from our guests today, because it will give our audience an opportunity to really understand how they can impact change through voting, through policy, and how it has been historically. So
Yes, indeed.
we're ready to get into this conversation. This is Bridges, Courageous Conversations, episode 8, Racially Biased Policy in the United States.
Let's hop in. So I'd like to bring up to the stage our guests today, Frederika Easley and Courtney Davis.
Welcome, ladies.
Welcome.
Hey.
How are you doing on this beautiful Friday?
I'm good. I'm big and pregnant right now, and so dealing with that. And Austin is I'm currently in Austin, Texas, and Austin is having a freeze, so it's like 20 degrees down here. So I am in the house, I am bundled, and I'm ready for the smoke, I'm ready for the heat.
Let's do it. Well, congratulations on pregnancy. I didn't know that, so that's terrific.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How are you doing, Courtney?
I'm doing well. I'm visiting my parents here in Denver, so we got a little bit of snow a couple of days ago. But the one thing that I love about Colorado is that we get about 300 days of sunshine, and so although it may snow, the sun comes out. It never lasts very long, and it makes for like a really beautiful scene when you see the sun reflecting off the snow. So
I was just thinking about that. What a gorgeous picture backdrop.
It
Snow and
is.
sunshine. Yeah.
Very beautiful. So I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you all.
Well, we are too. Thank you, ladies, for being brave and courageous and jumping into this. These conversations all season long have been centered by Black women. We're really excited to be the ones to say, this is how you do it. And we know that those closest to the problem typically have the solutions. And so we're going to talk about that today.
All right.
I think it's important for context and for our audience that you all introduce yourselves and tell us why this topic is so important, and why you can speak on it as the prodigy, as the expert. Frederika, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So again, I'm Frederika McClary Easley. I am from Buffalo, New York, which if anyone knows anything about the history of Buffalo, we are a really segregated city. At one point, I believe we were 4th in the nation in terms of segregation, but also with a rich history because we were one of the stops on the Underground Railroad, right? And so we have a rich history in Black pride. Recently, there have been a lot, right? There's been a lot about Juneteenth and it being kind of a new thing for so many, right? So many states and so many people, but that's something I grew up with, right? So Buffalo has that kind of juxtaposition of it being really segregated, but also there being a rich Black history and understanding. And so that's where I come from. I have a background of 15 plus years in labor, and over the last 2 years have been in the cannabis space, specifically focusing on analyzing policy, rules, and regs with a lens of equity. So I look for areas where language can be strengthened, where language may, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but unintentionally do harm, right? So that's pretty much my focus. I like causing good trouble. I like
Yes.
good trouble. And so I feel that I am definitely in excellent company today. Y'all already know I'm a mom. I am a mom, a wife, a sister, all of those things.
All the above.
All the above, right?
Those qualifiers, yes.
As Black women usually are, right? All of those things in our communities, and also a yogi. And so with that, there's also like personal intention of like recognizing harm. How am I intentionally dealing with it and addressing with it so that it does not essentially kill me, right? Because we know that stress is a silent killer. So I think that all of that will come out today. And thank you, Mskindness and Tiffany, for having me.
Of course.
The pleasure is ours. I'm excited to hear more about Baltimore. Whew, yes.
You know what? I did live in Baltimore, but I'm from Buffalo.
Oh, Buffalo. I'm sorry. Yes. Well.
So you're not wrong. I've lived there too.
Courtney, marijuana matters.
Yes. Thank you, ladies, so much for having me. My name is Courtney Davis, and I'm the executive director of Marijuana Matters, and have been in the cannabis space for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was working on Capitol Hill, and so that is the lens that I hope to bring today. I worked on Capitol Hill from 2012 to 2019 or 2020. Oh my gosh, no, yes, oh my gosh, it's been a long time. Almost 10 years. And during one of the most partisan times in the nation, I mean, I guess it can't be one of the most, because we're going to talk about some really, really divisive times in our country's history. But for me, it was a challenging time. And I got to learn a lot, though. I think I never imagined that I would be working on Capitol Hill. I'm from Southern California, Los Angeles, and San Diego. And I think although there are a lot of race relations there, there's a lot of diversity. And so I grew up kind of thinking that, hey, this is, things are cool. It's not that bad. My best friend was Japanese, and our school was just very diverse. But I think, sometimes that does you a bit of a disservice when you don't really understand the way that the laws have been created to impact the community that you lived in. I also grew up in a military town, so that might have been a little bit of why folks were, a little bit more united through their diversity. So yeah, really excited to have this conversation, to talk about some of the federal policies and just even my own personal experiences as a Black woman, in Capitol Hill, working in an institution that has created all of the challenges that we are working through today.
The very institution that has created all of the challenges we are working through today. I mean, let that be a tagline for this episode. Want to go back to the beginning, Tiffany?
Let's go back to the beginning. We always have to. These conversations are rich because we paint a complete picture of the experience of being of color, specifically Black, here in our United States of America. We know and acknowledge that this is a global issue, but we're going to talk about where we stand, where we work, where we play, where we raise our kids, where we use services. So I think it's super important that we remind everyone as they're watching this episode that this conversation started episode 1. So check them all out.
Yes.
Because we're going to talk about these things that are not only the result, but they're also the catalyst. And it would only be cute if I was talking about a sci-fi movie, because they are so ingrained in us. As I have said almost every single episode, this is a result of our tradition of bias and racism in these states that affect us all, regardless of color.
100%.
So let's hop in at the top. Yeah, wherever you want to start.
I mean, I want to go back because, we're talking about episode 1, right? Speaking of tradition and the roots of this country and why it is a tradition is because it was literally written into originating policy to be tradition. And so I want to go all the way back to 1619. We are talking about racially biased policies in the US. Anyone watching, any scholars, any judgy Judies out there who might be thinking, well, it was before that. Listen, we're talking about racially biased policies in the US. And so let's start with 1619. Yeah. Because the 1619 Project is an institution that has now been created to help spread knowledge on this very year and what happened. What happened in that year is we, via policy, created legal slavery. And I use we loosely in the human sense of we. Obviously not we Black people. Jump in there. Anybody can jump in there on 1619 and tell us a little bit more about it and why it was so impactful contractually for our country.
I'm gonna hop in right here because I really want to hear from the ladies that we have as guests. But I want to say that my goal of the conversation around this particular subject is for people to not only understand what the project is and kind of that, okay, well, that's a good of historical knowledge, but to understand the impact that it still creates now, because I hear too often we all do. Well, racism isn't what it used to be. Racism isn't really, it's not like that. You have so many rights, you have the same rights as I do. And this, if you understand why this project had to happen and why it's a controversy, this answers your question. And you will never really have to ask another Black person, well, why are you struggling so hard? Because you have the same rights as me. You'll see why we don't. Courtney, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about what you know about the project and why you feel it's an impact to now.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I really that folks have struggled with about the project is that I believe that Black Americans and white Americans have two very different versions of history. And so one of the things that I can recall about the project and some of the issues that, folks in the South or folks that don't understand is that they think that we're trying to, by highlighting the way that slavery, the laws of slavery, the way that it has impacted Black Americans to this day, they think that we're erasing their version of history and the Confederacy in particular, and the heroes that they once looked up to, and that a lot of schools are named after, and important roads. And I remember even on Capitol Hill, every state is allowed to commission 2 statutes that represent, individuals from their state. And a lot of these statues that were in the Capitol were of individuals that owned slaves. And so, by learning that history, by learning the truth about these individuals, we could really highlight where we can go now to reverse some of those policies, and even to reverse the way that we think about leaders and heroes in this nation. Like, why do we revere these individuals? Is it because they, yes, they were able to create air conditioning or whatever, but why were they able to do so? They were able to do so on the backs of slaves. And I think that's important. That has to be the foundation of what we're learning. That's why the 1619 Project was so important, because it highlighted a lot of those individuals that really, were leaders in our community because of slavery.
And I think, the project gets a lot of attention because they brought information to the surface, right? Said, here it is. We are the 1619 Project. But the year 1619 is key because it was the first shipment of people who were traded for goods. It was literally before, Jamestown was not the first colony here in the US. And so speaking of tradition and setting in our minds an idea around who these people are, what it means to be human began with this trading of humans based on the way they looked for goods. And when we think about the commodification of Black bodies today, that's still happening. And so you're right when you say, like, it really was the root of us beginning to learn people and what it meant to be a person. And it's making my hands sweat.
And I think more importantly, not necessarily what it meant to be a person, but to start to quantify the value of humanity.
Yes.
By the color of one's skin. Because I think we all realize we had value individually as humans, but when the crux was, oh, I'm more valuable than you. Go ahead, Frederika.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, the project in and of itself brought about a lot of controversy.
Yes.
Because, Courtney, to your point in terms of the Black understanding and the white understanding of our history, well, stories being told in history belong to the victor, right? So you have, those who are in positions of power who wanted to rewrite and to erase history, right? So there's not a different understanding necessarily. It's just in terms of whose story and stories were allowed to be told, what's in the textbook, right?
Listen, Frederika, I'm sorry, excuse me. You just said textbook. Somebody told me the other day that they pulled their kids out of school in Texas, and this is in the last 2 years, because in the textbook, it is literally referring to African slaves as immigrants.
Immigrants, and then there at one point, and I don't know if this, if they were able to do this, but at one point they wanted to refer to slaves as, oh God, what was it? Not indentured servitude, but unpaid labor or something.
Unpaid labor. That was exactly it. Unpaid labor.
Something of that sort, right? So it is their want, and when I say their, I mean those in positions of power, which historically has been white men, right? White men who are property owners, right? So these founding documents started the trend of what we're seeing for everything else that we're going to talk about in terms of laying down the foundation of who is deserving and who is not based on what you have and what you don't have. Okay. And a lot of that had to do with property ownership. But again, as I said, the history that they tried to paint was one of them being saviors and one of them being pure. And so the issue with the 1619 Project, and shout out to Nicole Hannah-Jones for that, right? The issue with that was that we have data, right? Like, this is not about feelings,
right?
Not an emotionally driven, argument. There is data, right, that shows that, like, hey, this rose lens, history that you're trying to paint here is not factual, right? And that is very hypocritical, and that, you all have intentionally, right? This was the start. This was the foundation of the separation, right? When we're talking about the 3/5 compromise, they like to say, oh, we wanted to enslave. No. That's not what it was about. It was about voting, right?
It was about voting. Yes.
It was voting. But again, you see this romanticism, like, throughout history, ways in which Black people were dehumanized, right? Without even having to say Black, and we'll talk about that in other things, but this was the foundation, right? Like, this was like setting the stage of, like, if you are a white man and you own property, you are important. You are to be valued, and you are to make these decisions. That's like, this is where it started.
Yes. You are more important because of ownership.
Yes, so. And I'm the one who gets to create the rules because I look a certain way.
That's it.
You talked about the 3/5 compromise. There's my teacher brain. I want to make sure everyone knows we have left so much out of the history books. And the 3/5 compromise is mentioned one day in the 5th grade, and then it comes back again in the 8th grade for one period, which is 55 minutes. And then it comes back again in the 10th grade for one period for 55 minutes. And we are supposed to understand that the 3/5 compromise, in one version of the narrative, was an opportunity for Blacks and enslaved people, which they don't use in the text, to be recognized. But the reality is it was the Southern state saying, hey, we want more voting power. We can now use these Black bodies to gain that.
Correct. Because we're not even a full person.
Exactly.
3/5.
To be specific, 3/5, 66% of a person.
We're cattle. You own me, right? Like I'm on the ledger. You've purchased this commodity. You own me. And that's what it is. And that also set the stage, right? Like as we move along through history, it set the stage with the separation of, white men of a certain social economic status, right? Versus those white men who were not property owners, right? So we'll say like poor whites. Now, at one point, you have poor whites more aligned with Blacks, right? Because they didn't feel like, they had their piece of the pie as well. But you can take the poorest white with the wealthiest Black, and they still would not want to trade places, right? Because they understand that their skin, in and of itself, their skin there's power, there's privilege, and there's
capital. Yes.
Correct.
And opportunities.
And I was just getting ready to say it's in opportunities. That is one of the key elements. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, because you were white, you could have been given an opportunity. I remember learning, even the Oregon Trail, all of those individuals were given money and given an opportunity to make that trek and settle out west. They weren't asked, they weren't saying, oh, this is only, if you're Black, you can go too. This opportunity was only for white men.
Only.
But that's still to this day, though, Courtney.
Yeah.
That's not just past. That's still to this day that just having that white skin gets you in the room, gets you its privilege, its protection, its power.
It's capital. It's a capital to buy opportunity without spending any money.
Without receive opportunity by default. That is really the key element. And we did go check back to white privilege, where we uncovered the story, but we did not finish the story because we try to keep our times to an hour and a half, and that is an 8-hour shift.
That's season 2. That's
okay. It is definitely, because there's an opportunity by default for having white skin in America. So yes, there have always been some parallels, and you hear them all the time. And people go, I haven't had any privilege in my life. My mom was on welfare. We didn't hardly have any food, and we're white. That's not privilege, but it was, because even with the strife, even back in the 1600s, if you didn't own slaves as property and you picked cotton one field over, you still were better for it because you weren't Black, because you weren't African descent. That in itself is privilege by default.
And you probably got paid, because the policy was that enslaved people could not be paid. Yeah, we couldn't be paid. Yes.
That's how you were able to stay on your land and be autonomous and not be beaten.
Your land
was not be raped
from you. Right.
Yes, exactly.
It wasn't just taken from you. You weren't beaten for whistling. You were able to be a person. Like, you were just able to operate. You were not living a life of walking on eggshells, scared of who you could offend, and also not being allowed to defend yourself. Right.
Okay. You are really speaking to my spirit about what's still happening today. I know that some people watching right now are thinking, you're talking about slavery. That was so long ago. I still don't understand. Like, Obama was president, right? We've heard it all. The 4 women on this stage have heard it all. They're ludicrous. We know that. But what you just said to me translates and resonates into me raising a Black son today, right? Like this nature that we had to develop, because if you've ever looked at anything that's displaying African history or the power that we came from, we did not walk in Africa. And today we do not walk in Africa with our heads down.
Right.
But we learned here, in order to protect ourselves, we had to begin behaving a certain way.
Yes.
And that is cellular still today.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how we began to move forward? Now we're in 3/5. Let's go resurrection. Let's go reconstruction. So now we've been freed, but we still have to behave a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's, the people who argue, well, that was slavery. It was a long time ago. They freed the slaves and you had every opportunity since.
When people say that, I often ask them, what does free mean to you? What does freedom mean to you? Because that word in and of itself is very loaded, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
We are still in the year of 2022, my Lord. We are still having so many firsts. And there's a reason for that. So when we're talking about free, what does that really mean? Free to what? Free
Exactly.
to
so many firsts. That's important.
Free to do what? And what does, and I like that question, Frederika. I also like to ask people questions, and that usually gets me in trouble, but I never care. What does your freedom hinge upon?
Yeah.
Because that's huge too. We all can exercise freedom. We can do that all day long, but what do you hinge upon? What's going to happen if you act like you're too free? What's going to happen if your definition of freedom is different than their definition of freedom?
Ooh, and the people with the power get to decide what freedom looks like.
Exactly.
Somebody doesn't like how you're moving, your confidence. They don't like seeing you with a certain person. How can they then use their power to knock you down a peg?
Yeah, let's compare Elon Musk to Kanye West today. I said it out loud.
Yeah. You're saying words.
Same words, different faces saying them. If we talk about one of my favorite books is Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. I just think it really articulates for a population today, their attention span, the way it's written, and the explanations throughout. It dives into a lot of these subjects. And when we talk about like Jim Crow, we have to remind people that wasn't that long ago, that my mother lived during Jim Crow.
Correct.
Right? Who is still alive today, who is here right now. That's really important. So let's talk about that impact and what Jim Crow did to our country as others were getting opportunities to move west and build and buy homes and do all these things. Courtney, can you speak a little bit on the policy of Jim Crow?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the conversation of opportunities. You mentioned it just now. As the nation was moving away from, the number one producer, revenue generator in the country, which was, slavery and cotton, and looking for ways to make other money, the country was passing out money for opportunities and giving folks opportunities to move other places. But those opportunities were restricted for Black individuals. We, especially those that were still living in the South, and even those that had moved up north, as we had known, with Emmett Till and folks that are in Illinois and on these other northern states, their opportunities. I mean, their experiences were not as bad in the South, but different, in a different magnitude. And so I think that it was, there were certain things that you couldn't do. They created these Jim Crow laws that essentially made it really easy to arrest individuals of color.
You cannot be outside when it's dark.
And then they would arrest them, and there wasn't a very free and fair justice system as we have now. And so once you were arrested, it was ultimately like you were going to be, incarcerated.
You were going to be a slave again. You were another enslaved human. Yes, which happened as a result of policy because the 13th Amendment said it's okay to take away your freedom if we send you to prison.
I mean, if you make it to prison, because depending on who caught you or what you were arrested for, I mean, again, you are assuming and taking for granted that we actually get to even entertain this justice system that is systemically, it was built with us to have a disadvantage, right? Like it was built against us being able to properly stand up in it and have just justice. But a lot of times our brothers, our sisters, our elders, they didn't even make it. They did not make it to the jail.
Depending on offense, depending on what they've done, what white woman they had looked at or made a gesture towards, or didn't keep their eyes to the ground when a white man passed by, or any of that. Most of the time, let's just be 100% real about it. They were killed on site or later on in their homes, in front of their children, in front of their wives, in front of everything. End of story. So making it to jail was lucky.
Period.
The victim of illegal lynching, which in the United States, lynching is still not illegal.
Correct.
That is correct.
Policy.
I think,
and in its own way, trees still bear strange fruit.
Yeah. I think, Courtney, you mentioned being a product of a military home. My dad served in Vietnam. My godfather as well.
Mine as well. Yeah.
Okay, so shout out to all of our veterans, and their sacrifice. But I think about the GI Bill, right? Yes. I think about these stories of these soldiers coming home. First of all, like you have Black soldiers going away, fighting for a country that does not love them, right? A country that does not see them as an equal, but they're still out there risking their lives, right? And oftentimes put into the worst and most dangerous situations, right? It's like let them go first, right? But then they come home. And I was told stories growing up about, these parades of welcoming them back. And then to your point about the government just like handing out money, right? So it's like, hey, you're back, we want to help you get a home. We have these GI bills. We want to help you with education, things of that nature. And then, a lot of Black soldiers, for the most part, were slapped in the face, right? Because when it was time for them to access those benefits, there was so much red tape, right?
And you're talking about 1972, Frederika. I was just in the car the other day listening to NPR. Yeah, and they were talking about new initiatives now in the Veterans Affairs Department, and how I think Black veterans who come home, I think the number was somewhere about 60% are denied in comparison to their white, counterparts at like 20% denial. Yeah. So still today, 2022, I was just listening to this story on NPR, and you're talking about Vietnam.
Yeah.
So and it's the conditioning,
When we look at wealth building, we know that property ownership is a huge component
to wealth
building, right? Being able to move into middle class status and beyond that, right? So if you're coming back, okay, and you are not given equal access to these benefits, and then when you are able to get a home, and I'm just putting numbers out here for picture painting, but you are able to get a home, and let's say this home is $20,000 at that time, but the bank is going to charge you $35,000. Okay, they're going to say that your mortgage needs to be $35,000, and where this white soldier may have been able to get 5% interest or 2% interest or whatever the case may be, your interest is going to be 15%, 25% Black man, and you better not be late with NAIR payment. You better not be delinquent with NAIR payment, because whatever taxes and fees we're going to put on it, and or just come and take the house, right? So now we're just kicking you and your family out. Right. And we know how important equity building is, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to relegate you to certain areas. Okay, so redlining, right? We're going to relegate you to certain areas where these are the only areas where you can buy a home. And we know also in that area, we're going to pump it with more minorities, Blacks, immigrants, like those coming in who we don't deem as worthy or as worthy, right? As our, our epitome of worth, which is, white male, blonde hair, blue eyed, right? So we keep kind of going down the totem pole from there, but we're going to put you over here in this area, right? Where there are probably more renters than owners. We're going to
which means your schools get less property taxes. We're going to frame the
Mm-hmm.
government for your property to pay for the schools in your area, because that's policy. And then your house is worth less because the policy we created makes your house worth less. And
Correct.
then we pump immigrants and new people to the country who have to learn the language. And then we group you all together, and we've culturally defined you as less than based on the way you look. And now your schools get less attention because they get less money. And so your schools are crappy. And then, and so now the kids that come out of these schools are underserved with less education, less critical thinking skills because their parents are on survival mode. I mean, listen, like, oh my God.
It drops it all down. And for those who are listening and trying to absorb this, that really escalated quickly. And so what people need to understand is that the bottom line is, because of redlining, that is where ghettos come from. You want to use that word, then you need to understand where that comes from. It comes from lack of opportunity, lack of resources, lack of monies, lack of attention. That all stems from being Black and being worth less than a white counterpart in another neighborhood. Everything else is in parallel. Both humans, both family people, both working, both serve their country in the military, both fall down and scrape their knee and bleed red. That's right. But because one is Black, relegated to an area that is going to have a lot more strife and a lot less opportunity, medical, everything. That is what makes that. Ghetto isn't because these people don't care about where they live. A ghetto is because the government doesn't care about its people and doesn't recognize that a certain percentage of American citizens are still people. And that wasn't yesteryear.
No.
That was yesterday and today, and will be tomorrow if we don't keep having these conversations and some change comes from it.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something I wanted to bring up to just put a finer point on it, is that there was a new study published by researchers at the University of Maryland School of Public Health that mentioned that the average life expectancy, and this was in Baltimore, in neighborhoods that were formerly categorized as investment risk, which are the redlining areas, is as much as 5 years lower compared to those that were deemed safe for investment. So that's the life expectancy.
I need you to say that again, Courtney, because sometimes I feel like those pieces of information just fly by in these episodes. Like, one, you introduced a new terminology. These areas are an investment risk. So please, can you just one more time say that?
Yes. The University of Maryland School of Public Health recently did a study, and they found that the average life expectancy in Baltimore neighborhoods that were formerly categorized as investment risks is as much as 5 years lower compared to those that were deemed safe for investment. And the neighborhoods that were categorized as investment risk are the ones that were redlined, and they had a category from A to D, and D, they use letters and colors, and it essentially put red lines and Ds around the neighborhoods that they thought were too risky based on the people that were living there.
Really, literally establishing policy to kill us.
To kill, yes, to kill. Because, and we know, we say stress. Okay, someone said it earlier, stress is a silent killer. So imagine the amount of stress that comes from being oppressed constantly, being oppressed by default, having laws in place to oppress you. That's the freedom that you say I have. That's the freedom that you say, I don't recognize because slavery is over. That was so long ago. That's the freedom that you tell me that I am not affected by racism and don't pull the race card. That's the freedom. Freedom to die faster than
to die faster. You know, I really think like this comes up for me a lot, my hair, because it's so easy for people to relate to when they understand that, you know, my best friend was denied a job because he had dreadlocks. Literally, they said, we want to hire you, but can you cut your hair? So I just want every white person to imagine applying for a job, being overqualified for this job, and being told, well, you know, we don't really, blonde hair, can you dye it red to get this job? This is like the simplest way we can explain policy and how it is completely racially biased, right? No policies written by employers that say no afros longer than 3 inches. Who has an afro? It's just like, you know, and then to think about redlining, and you ask, you know, a lot of naysayers. Well, now, again, now you have this opportunity. So just work hard and get out of the ghetto. Why can't you just work hard and get out of the ghetto?
You know, it's a term that comes to mind that I think kind of like captures, especially, you know, what you were saying, Tiffany, the social determinants, right? And so social determinants are all of the things. That is the full picture of where you live, the food that you have access to, your air quality, your water, your schools, your public transportation, your access to that, how all of that shapes and impacts. And what we know is that intentionally, they have put Black people specifically in positions where our social determinants have a negative impact on our existence. Not even livelihood, just our existence. It's kind of to your point about this hair piece. You know what's funny to me about it is that they will write policy that is anti or against literally how we woke up. Like literally how our hair comes out of our head, how the lips that we were born with, the bodies that we are blessed with. They will write policy against this stuff, right? In terms of dress codes, in terms of the Crown Act. Again, this is not new. This is why slaves were forced to wear scarves and
cover their hair.
Why they had to cover their hair, because the women of the house were actually jealous of how intricate their braiding was and how beautiful it made them.
So they changed the narrative. They changed the narrative and called it unruly, right? We start naming the hair different things now. Bad hair. We start defining it. They did.
Correct. But here's the interesting thing. They will write these policies so that we can't enjoy our natural state of being, but then they do it. Like then you'll see like white people with locks.
And you're ready for that one, Frederika.
Don't get me started on that, okay? I can't with the Bo Derek. Bo Derek was the first person to introduce cornrows.
You'll see white women going to get perms. You know what I mean? So that their hair can they can have a fro, so that it can thicken. You'll see white women. I mean, anytime I travel to a place with people of color like Jamaica or whatever, you'll see white women in line to get their hair braided. You know what I mean? You see white women, you know, I think back to like Salt and Pepper with the asymmetrical cuts. Like you see white women putting all kind of chemicals in their hair so that they can have the free stack and the curls and finger waves and all of this kind of stuff that like we're demonized for. They're plumping up their lips. They're plumping up their asses. Wait, can I cuss? Can I say
yes, of course.
Listen. Oh yeah, they're doing it all.
It's a passionate topic. It's a passionate topic.
They plumping up their lips. They plumping up their ass. You know, all of this stuff. That policies are written for us to feel less than, for us to be inconvenienced in our natural state.
But then they're not, when you go to work with an afro or dreadlocks and you're a white person, right? They can pull it up into a bun and it's almost as if like it's not the same.
The policy
right, that it's different. Somehow the rules apply in a different way when it's wrapped around a white person.
Yep.
I mean, and we've left out one very important one, Frederika, because I love the train you're on. I'm right there with the ticket in hand. Is tanning. How is it that you can tan as dark as you want to? You can be brown, okay? But I can't be brown. I can't be as brown as I am. Why is that? Why does that work that way?
About Rachel Dolezal, who literally had us all questioning if you can decide what race you want to be.
I mean, because I would put that on a job application if it would make a difference. I'm still gonna bring crazy.
I'm going to present this way, but I'm really white.
But okay, so I really want you to talk a little bit more about Rachel Dolezal, Courtney, because I'm sure you know, like now she's native, I think. Like she just keeps on changing her name, and we just keep letting that happen. How come she gets that opportunity or that privilege to become Black when it benefits her?
Well, it is a lot easier to go from a white canvas to a darker canvas than it is to go from a darker canvas to a lighter canvas. So she had the science was on her side, but Rachel Dolezal was essentially a white woman who had infiltrated the Black race because she said that she felt like she was a Black woman. And she was, I can't remember the state, but she was like working in the NAACP.
Yes.
She was a Black hairstylist. And she was checking the box that she was also Black. And she was uncovered. I mean, her parents came on TV and literally they were white, and they were like, "This is our daughter. She was not born Black." And Rachel had to, she attempted to explain that she identified.
She began using that language. Well, I identify. So then it was like, well, I tell my dad this. My dad is a former veteran and officer. I say, listen, if I ever go to jail, like make sure, like you tell the attorney, like I want to be tried as a white person. Like that's how I want to be tried. Can I check that box? Because speaking of an inequitable justice system, I mean, we literally need to say, I want to be tried in the same way my white counterparts are. Look at their arrest rates and look at ours. And I want to be tried like them.
Better chances of beating the case. That's what I want.
Yeah. And that whole situation was offensive on a whole. But to me personally, for those of you who check out our colorism episode, my daughter appeared on that episode. My daughter, she is what they say where my family's from is Passé Blanc. She looks just as white as any other white person. And when found out that her mother is Black, all the world falls down around her. So for you to try to infiltrate, perpetrating a fraud into the Black race and have nothing but opportunity come towards you is just deeply, deeply indicative of the problems that we have and very offensive to a section of Black people who look white but cannot identify as white because when found, they're just Black. As Mskindness has seen my daughter, and everybody who's watched the episode has seen my daughter, says that if anybody could identify as white, this young woman could.
Listen, Winnie for sure is white passing and beautiful soul and could pretend all day if she wanted to. That episode is so powerful because it was a mother and daughter sharing their experiences and how Tiffany was not allowed to be a mother normally because she was Black. Like her motherhood of this little girl she was with would be questioned. They would ask her daughter, is that really your mommy? Yep. So the idea, and let's flip that narrative. We have white families that adopt Black children all the time.
And their praise are like, oh my gosh, look at you.
And don't nobody walk up to them in a grocery store and say, is that really your mommy? Are you safe, little Black boy? I know you feel that, Frederika. What you want to say? I see you.
Y'all trying to get my pressure up.
Keep it down.
You're pregnant. Keep it down.
Keep it down.
The reality is this. Black women, Black presenting women are, and I believe this was Farrakhan, Minister Farrakhan, who said this. I think matter of fact, Malcolm X said it. We are the least protected. Okay. Least valued. And so the reason why you don't see people coming up to little Black boys and girls in grocery stores who are with white people asking, "Are you okay?" is because no one cares.
No one cares.
Period. You are not valued. No one cares. And the reason why Rachel was able to get away with what she was able to get away with, because it was probably, a thought of her being insane to a certain degree. Like, why are you opting into this? Like, why are you? And even in what she did, there was, because of colorism, there was privilege in what she did and how she presented. But there was this thought of insanity. Like, why are you even opting into this? Why do you want to present as Black? Why are you identifying this way?
I think that's why I kind of giggled, because I was like, well, damn, she was crazy. So we just let her be crazy.
I mean,
it was like she was left to her devices to be crazy, but you don't get to, it's just a slap in the face that you think you can take your whiteness, infiltrate my race, and get opportunity. But I'll be damned if that's not what happened. We gotta just put it real. That is kind of what happened.
It's that, but even to think that you understand, or to position yourself as an authority, as if you understand the plight of being a Black woman. But we get slapped in the face all the time. I'm going to say something. I know this is not popular, but I remember when Caitlyn Jenner decided that that they were going to
transition,
be presented, or wanted to present as a woman. And I believe it was in that same year that they received a Woman of the Year award
at the ESPYs. Yes.
I said, well, goddamn.
Yeah, it was an ironic convolution, though, because it was like the ESPYs is sports related, and Caitlyn won the awards as Bruce, but was honored by the sports organization as a woman. And so it was a whole lot of convolution. But you're right; it speaks to the privilege that comes with white skin. I mean, you get to literally just do whatever you want and still win.
Whatever you want. And, again, as long as it's in the scope of a woman, and then specifically when you tack on being a Black woman, well, then you get carte blanche. I mean, like, we're going to roll out the carpet for you.
Well, this makes me, this Rachel Dolezal thing makes me think about something else we wanted to touch on, which is affirmative action. Because Tiffany, you alluded to, or you didn't allude, you said, like, look, she got to have these opportunities because of her Blackness, right? Her fake Blackness. And that included like working for the NAACP. I think she got scholarship money. That came up. She got scholarship money at her university. And so back to the naysayers, this is my role in Bridges a lot. What do you say to the people that say, well, look, she did get opportunity because she was Black. There's affirmative action. She got scholarships. I don't get scholarships for being white.
White women are the largest recipient group of benefits on behalf of affirmative action.
Explain that.
I mean, so we see this in policy a lot, that you can't explicitly say, or anytime you explicitly bring in race, you say Black, Indigenous, Latinx, that there's a lot of, that the lawsuits come, and there's a lot of red tape that comes along with it. And so if you look at affirmative action language, you will see ethnicity, you will see race and gender, you will see physical abilities. You'll see affirmative action is not just for Black people. right? This is not reparations. Okay. And so you will see all of these.
Okay, there's another, say that again. Say that again.
Action is not reparations. Okay. So you have all of these other categories that are a part of affirmative action. And gender is one of them. And so again, white women are often beneficiaries of affirmative action policies.
I think that's really important for people to understand, because the connection to affirmative action in the mind of at least 90% of our US population is that it's for Black people. And that and a percentage of that group would argue that it is even reverse racism.
Right.
Can you talk more?
I saw it written as positive racism. Right. And I thought, ooh, well, that's pretty juicy. What are you saying? The other one is, so the other one is actually negative, right? Is that what we're saying? Right? Watch the words and speak them. Look, the bottom line is that correct, women, white women do suffice a need when people are ticking boxes on, did I do enough affirmative action? Did I do enough of whatever?
Oh, I have women. I have a lot of women.
Box, and it's a pretty heavy one, and they check it often.
Yeah.
But what is the huge kicker is the general public. And I'm saying those who probably aren't going to make it to college, those who aren't going to get anywhere near where a policy, they can even smell it. Okay. They're the ones who are screaming the loudest about, there's an ignorance there. And I'll say it, you're ignorant don't confuse stupidity and sophomoric with being, ignorant.
Unlearned, not knowing.
You need to learn. Mm-hmm. They are saying things like, well, that takes opportunities away from me. Affirmative action takes something from me. And so first, we have to understand that affirmative action happens mostly in arenas, collegiate arenas, job force, executive job force, policy, lawmaking, things like that. So when you're working at the Walmart or wherever it is that you work for your menial wages per hour, and you say to me that affirmative action keeps you at minimum wage, I need you to be more cognizant of the reality of your situation as a white person or a person who's just generally not Black. Okay, so no one feels picked on. Is that your situation is that you were not at the caliber of a person who would even need affirmative action. This is equitable space and treatment at a level that surpasses you, obviously. So do not pass judgment when you don't know what things mean.
Ooh, how about reserve your judgment until you done read some stuff.
On another episode.
You want to say something, Courtney? I see you like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to touch on the gender-based affirmative action. And, in nearly every dimension of American life, like the disparities are greater in the realm of race than there are in gender. And so I do think, what I like to talk about is like the intent of a policy versus the outcome. I think affirmative action was created to, the intent was to create more diversity within, more equality within, the workforce, the collegiate force, the military, and to give businesses and public institutions a framework to use to create some sort of internal policy that could meet these check marks. But the outcome of that, because of our inability to explicitly state that this is for Black people, women and white women in particular have benefited. But affirmative action has increased the representation of people in color in business and in these other professions, mostly because of how it was introduced into the pipeline of talent generated by higher education. So there is that benefit that has taken place, but there are a number of groups that are, using our judicial system, our checks and balances to basically reverse those protections.
that's happening now. I mean, it's currently a debate in our current Congress. I think that's really important for people to know. We're not talking about 1965. It's still a debate.
The Supreme Court. I mean, we have
Yes.
the most conservative Supreme Court than we've had in 90 years.
Mm-hmm.
And how did we get here? I don't want to take up all the time, but
No,
I mean,
you speak.
I mean, elections matter.
Elections matter.
Filibuster, 2013, when the Democrats decided to change the filibuster rules because
Right.
the Senate Republicans weren't letting any of President Obama's judicial nominations through. And then they punished us for it in 2016 when Republicans had the House after the Tea Party movement, and then they removed the filibuster for judicial federal nominations and the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And then they refused, they wouldn't.
These are things, though, I want to, Courtney, this is stuff that like average Americans do not know, do not understand, do not realize how voting works and how a bill becomes a law, and like these little nuances that contribute to these big, we think, oh, the president should just fix all that.
Right, but they want to talk about it. The average voting citizen wants to talk about it, but still vote incorrectly. They want to talk about it, but not completely understand the impact of what it is that they follow. And when they're just following along with the mass herd, they don't understand these intricacies. So they're very welcomed, and I hope that people are listening up.
And I heard you say something too, Courtney. You said perhaps because we didn't frame affirmative action as for Black people. Did you say that? Like we should have been really educating the community and using the right terminology around affirmative action so there wasn't so much unintended benefit? Is that what you meant?
I think it was, well, partially it was that, but also the way that the law was written, gender was added into affirmative action. And I think it was because of legal challenges. I mean, let's just be real. There isn't anything in this world that is just for Black people that I could really, even Black student union groups, I was told by a student that they had to create the bylaws in a way that if a white student or a non-Black student wanted to join, they could. And that is,
there isn't anything that has been created that is just for Black people.
Not even HBCUs, and I attended one. We had international students, and that could be just because they needed the money, but I don't know what is specific and sacred for us, except for the things that grow naturally on our body, the way that,
That's not even sacred though.
Or protected.
Our bodies are not sacred.
I build a body.
The term that comes to mind is willful ignorance, though, because people will flood their timelines and will flood their what they consume in order to feed the narrative that makes them feel good, in order to feed the narrative that supports, their arguments, right? So when we're talking about affirmative action and how there is a huge population of people who like to think it's about giving Black people an unfair advantage. Well, that's convenient. That's willful ignorance. And it's convenient if you want to, flood your psyche with information that feeds your narrative of something is being taken from me. Someone is getting more than I'm getting, or what I feel like I deserve, what I feel like is mine. It's the same thing with welfare. We know that that white women are the biggest or the largest percentage of those who receive welfare. But there was the other thing we have to keep saying is intention. There were intentional PR campaigns. There's intentional policy language that demonizes and positions Black people in these vilified roles. So when you had the stories of the welfare queens coming out, and it was like, oh, they beat the system, they're just having kids, so that they can get these checks, they're just sitting at home. Of course, the face of that was a Black woman. I believe it was a Black woman from Chicago
Yeah,
You
that's the media narrative, and that's ongoing. It's historical. It's now.
But
It
those
has support. There's support at every level.
It's what started the war on. It's what justified the war on drugs, or what created it. You know, vilifying cannabis usage, marijuana usage by Black people,
like jazz musicians,
exactly.
musicians, and or Mexicans, which is why we changed the why the terminology was changed from cannabis to marijuana. So we got to call a spade a spade. It's intentional marketing. It's intentional PR of putting certain people, usually Black, Latinx, Indigenous people, in the limelight. You of being demonic, being
aggressive,
whatever adjective you want to put in there, but that's what it is.
And it goes back to who's in the room when these policies are being created. And I wanted to just briefly go back to the Crown Act, because the reason why the Crown Act exists is because it's not protected under the Civil Rights Act.
And it didn't pass the other day. It didn't
pass the other day. And the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, had it prohibited employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, things like that. And if a Black person had really have been in a position, not to say that Black people weren't involved in the Civil Rights Act, but if they had thought about hair discrimination, or if they, based on their lived experience, because that's how you create good policies, is what has happened in my life that I could have used protection from. Appearance.
We need to be at the table for that to happen.
We need to be at the table to be able to include something like natural hair, Afro threads, whatever, braids.
But Courtney, so now what you bringing up is respectability politics, because let's be real in terms of the Black community, that is not a monolith, right? So at the time, the reason why Rosa Parks gets credit for her bus ride, but oh Jesus, why is her name blanking? And it starts with the C.
The one who was unwed with the kids, and
correct, the dark-skinned young lady who was not as articulate, and the reason why she doesn't get the credit for being the first, for refusing to give up her seat, is because of respectability politics. So you had a lot of people in the room at that time when these decisions were being made, even Black people themselves, who, and I'm
put
not
the light in the woman out front, because it was easier for that to it was like the gateway. It's like CBD. It's the gateway to real weed.
No shade, right? No shade, because there were things that our elders felt like they had to do
yes,
to make it, in order to,
it's a part of the conditioning. I mean, it's
but
exactly. So much to unpack.
Exactly.
So much. Listen, so much. Okay, here we go, Tiffany. We can go on for 8 hours on this.
Was it Claudette Colvin?
Yes.
Thank you for that. That's important, because
and it is that part. Those things are incredibly important to the narrative of why we do those things, because we are talking about a lot of things against us, and we also have things that we do, but that's
the conditioning Courtney's talking about.
Against us because we're conditioned.
Right.
Yes.
My father was an entrepreneur, and back in the days when it was not common for Black men to own businesses, and he taught me the most valuable thing I think I've ever had to use, and that is to have the front fascia of your business be white.
That part. My first email was like John something, like the first, when I first got into the cannabis industry, it was like a white woman's name and a white man's name, because my father gave that same advice. But that's that conditioning, right? Like,
it was the conditioning. He always had the receptionists and the frontline workers were white, because people will pass by a Black-owned business. So in order to be and remain successful, even though my father was a part of a lot of firsts. I mean, that man was born in the early 30s. Yeah. So that he was a part of a lot of firsts, but still had to play a certain game just to be successful. So that is a deep part of the conditioning that has to be done in order to get our stories to life,
or in order to be safe.
Yeah.
In order to be safe, because I have to teach my son to behave a certain way in the streets. You can't be wilding out when you're out there with your white-skinned friends. You can't be the loudest when you're out there with your white-skinned friends. And because my children are very emotionally intelligent, the next question is, why not? So now I have to explain to them things that my white counterpart parents do not have to explain to their children. Current day relevance, right? So our fathers were teaching us for success, you got to play the white game. I'm teaching my son to be safe. You have to dim your light. You have to take off your hoodie. You have to not be exactly who you want to be and who you were born to be because of the narrative that has been created around your existence and the way you look. And it
goes back to freedom.
So it all goes back to freedom. He does not have the same freedom. Yes. Thank you for that. Woo! Okay. I want us, yes, I know. I'm like, my armpits are sweaty. Every episode, I'm just like, I want us to do this for our viewers before we wrap. We have given a lot of information. We have made a lot of connections. We have weaved policy throughout history. We have talked about present day back 450 years and how so much is still the same. But to the average American, to the white women who is primarily our audience, who are here because they really want to learn, but they just don't know and they don't want to be willfully ignorant. I want us to tell them exactly what to do. What's the next move? And it can be whatever you think, whatever has inspired you. This conversation has inspired you to say, but what's the next move for our viewers?
I mean, in general, and just in terms of life.
What? I mean, knowing who the audience is watching. Yeah, that's why I was like, it's a real open question.
It's open. Yeah, we want to hear from you. Go ahead, Frederika.
All right. Well, first and foremost, let me just say, because I didn't do this in my intro, that I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the People's Ecosystem.
Okay. Yes.
My apologies. I talked about what I did, but didn't give my title.
No, that's okay, because we want people to research too. But yes, that's important.
Yeah, do your research. But I would be negligent if I didn't do that. So my apologies. I absolutely love the people I work with. So wanted to do that. Now, in terms of Jesus Christ, next step.
And no, it's your pregnancy brain. It's okay. Just
no, I know. Just, hold on. No, next move. What's your next move? So to all of you watching, this is your next move.
Is to step out of the matrix. And by that, I'm referring to, we talked about this earlier about critical thinking. We have to understand that only people and things that matter are attacked. And so this idea that our voice, our vote, our anything does not matter or is not of value is a fallacy, because the very existence of these attacks on voter rights, on, on our bodies as women, on our hair, on, like, plug in anything, right? But the fact that those things are being attacked means that they matter. And I know we say every election is important, every election is important, every election is important. I feel like the Dems are horrible with their fucking messaging. But the fact of the matter is that it is important. Unfortunately, we are positioned in this country that we cannot take our foot off the gas, because if we slow up, those in power, those who feel like our existence is a threat in and of itself, are going to take. And we cannot allow that to happen. So we got to come out the matrix. We got to first embrace, recognize, acknowledge our full selves and all the glory and all the power and all the importance. And then we gotta take some actions based on that. So that's vote, that's speak up, that's get involved, that's all of those things. But the first thing is like, we have to do some internal work.
Address your mental health.
We got to do some internal work. I would say that.
Thank
Love
you.
it.
Yes.
Thank
Courtney,
you.
next move. What's our next move?
The next move, I think one of the things, and this is not just for non-Black people, I had to do a lot of learning myself, because just because we are Black does not mean that we are experts on how to be anti-racist. And so the first thing I would encourage people to do is pick up some literature. You can listen to things, this podcast. You can also listen to things on Audible. We mentioned the 1619 Project. There's also How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. He's written a couple of books. I think we just have to learn. We have to give ourselves an opportunity to relearn some things.
Relearn, yes.
I'm a person that needs to, I got to read it. I got to hear it. I got to kind of process it. And then that can help me change the way that I think. Those that are in positions of power need to kind of decenter themselves for a moment and try to find ways to think, as Frederika said, get outside the matrix. How do you get outside the matrix if you're centering everything around yourself and your experience? Get to know some other folks. And one of the things that, and I am a policy person, but I'm also political. I recently joined a political action committee a couple of years ago that was started by two of my friends, women that I used to work with on the Hill. And it's a women-only PAC that we all put our money together, 2% of our salary or whatever you really want to put your money towards. And we pick progressive candidates in local and state elections. That gives me a really good feeling of like, I did something
actionable, right? I put someone in a position.
Something that you could do. I think it's great to do, once you get on those Democratic and those Republican listservs, you're never going to stop asking for money. But focusing on something, a more tangible, smaller local and state elections, I think will really help you to become involved, your civic engagement. Even if you're not able to volunteer, you could spend a couple of hours for an election cycle deciding which candidates you want to support. Here's $50, keep it moving. But make sure that you understand what it is that you want them to do for you.
That really resonates with me, the local involvement, because it teaches people about how policy occurs, like what happens right there with your school board. You will see.
When they try to eliminate those books from the classroom, you need a school board member who thinks like you do, or who will at least take the time to hear you out.
Yes.
Right.
This has been an amazing dialogue. Tiffany, let's give our next moves too, because this is it. This is episode 8. This is the close of season 1. We focused and bridges this season on race, equity, and inclusion. We covered all the topics, not all the topics, my goodness. We covered so many topics, international colorism, the mental health in the Black community, standardizing inclusion in the workplace, tokenism, opportunity, and access. That one was powerful. So what would be your next move, Tiffany, for our audience?
Our next move. The next move for our audience, our listeners, our watchers is recognize us as not only as people, but as excellence. And I feel comfortable saying that because when you listen to this season, when you listen to this conversation, what you've heard us describe is our excellence and why it's feared and why it's held back. So recognize it, learn from it, include it, because we are here. We have always been here. For those who are still alive today, we have always been here and been a part of this society. And we're still fighting the same old fight. That is why we're having these conversations. It sounds like it's at you, but it really is with you and for you, because we need a bridge of communication and acknowledgement and reason in order to move forward. You tell your kids every day, everybody's the same. And it takes all of us. Then if you really believe that everyone is the same, you have to recognize us and you have to include us for there to be all. Because if you don't, then it's just you and you are a part of the problem. So with that, I am so happy to have this season close, but know also that there's so much more to talk about, and there's so many more topics to cover, and I want to include you. So with that,
man, so much more. I think my next move, it keeps on changing as you all are talking. I think I've got two, because I'm going to close with one that's just tangible. But I just put something on Twitter the other day, and it was, if you are out in the world teaching your children to treat everyone the same, please stop. Please teach your children to treat people the way they want to be treated. And the only way you can do that is to ask people how they want to be treated and have compassion for their difference. And then let that compassion grow into an appreciation for their difference. And that will make us all a little bit smarter. I'm really, really passionate about that. Stop treating people the way you want to be treated. Treat them the way they want to be treated. And then secondly, I would say, your next move is to go back and watch episode 1. Start there. Watch episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then watch this one again. Okay? That's our next move. I want to thank Courtney Davis. I want to thank you, Frederika Easley. I want to thank you, Tiffany Watkins, for being by my side this whole season, helping us bring these powerful conversations to the table. I want to thank Lisa Snyder and the whole Tokeativity team. And I want to thank you, the viewers, for watching, for being here, for taking the notes, and for committing to going out and making intentional, impactful change with your new knowledge. This has been a very powerful first season of Bridges, Courageous Conversations. Season 1, Race, Equity, and Inclusion. It's a wrap. It's a wrap. And thank you all.